it started innocently enough. I had lived in Maple Ridge Estates for 3 years, quietly paying my HOA fees and keeping my lawn precisely 2 3/4 inches tall, just as the community guidelines specified. I worked in commercial real estate development, which meant I understood property law better than most, but I preferred to keep a low profile in neighborhood politics. That changed the day Karen Pemberton knocked on my door about my Halloween decorations. She stood there in her perfectly pressed khakis and polo shirt, clipboard in hand, looking like she was about to conduct a military inspection. Karen, I should mention, had been HOA president for 4 consecutive terms, running unopposed each time because nobody else wanted the headache. "These decorations are completely inappropriate for a family neighborhood," she declared, gesturing at my front yard. I had put up what I considered a tasteful Halloween display: some carved pumpkins, artificial spider webs, a few skeleton hands reaching out of the ground, and a motion-activated ghost that would appear in my front window when someone walked by. "I'm sorry, Karen, but I don't see how they violate any HOA rules," I replied calmly. "I checked the community guidelines thoroughly before putting them up." Her face reddened slightly. "They're scary and disturbing." "What about the children? Mrs. Henderson's granddaughter was terrified walking by yesterday. The decorations are only visible from the street, they're not grotesque, and Halloween is a widely celebrated holiday. I believe they fall well within the seasonal decoration allowances outlined in Section 4.7 of our community guidelines." Karen's clipboard pressed tighter against her chest. "We'll see about that. I'm calling an emergency HOA board meeting." 3 days later, I sat in the community center conference room with a 5-person HOA board. Karen had prepared what could only be described as a PowerPoint presentation titled, "The Threat to Our Community Values." She had taken photos of my decorations from multiple angles, including some creative shots that made my cheerful jack-o'-lanterns look ominous in harsh camera flash lighting. "These decorations promote violence and dark themes," Karen argued, clicking through her slides. "They lower property values and create an unwelcoming environment for families." Board member Jim Morrison, a retired accountant, raised his hand. "Karen, with all due respect, they look like pretty standard Halloween decorations to me. My grandkids would love them." "That's exactly the problem, Jim. We're normalizing frightening imagery for children." After an hour of debate, the board voted 4-1 in my favor. Karen was the sole dissenting vote. The decorations could stay. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. The next morning, I woke up to find Karen taking photographs of my house from the sidewalk. When I opened the front door, she didn't even look embarrassed. "I'm documenting code violations," she announced. "Your mailbox is 2 inches too far from the curb. Your garden edging extends 3 inches beyond the approved boundary. And that tree in your backyard has branches hanging over the Henderson's property line. Karen, you're measuring with a ruler? The rules are the rules. I'll be filing formal complaints about each violation." Over the next 2 weeks, I received 7 different violation notices. My doormat was apparently the wrong shade of brown. My house numbers were mounted 1/4 inch too low. A single dandelion in my back lawn constituted failure to maintain landscaping standards. Each violation came with a $50 fine and a demand for immediate correction. I paid the fines and made the adjustments, thinking Karen would eventually tire of her campaign. Instead, she escalated. She began parking her car directly across from my house every morning at 7 a.m., taking photos and making notes. She started a neighborhood email chain titled, "Protecting Our Property Values," where she would send daily updates about various infractions she had observed throughout the community, though mine were always listed first and in the most detail. The breaking point came when she knocked on my door at 6:15 a.m. on a Saturday morning. Your Halloween decorations need to come down immediately, she demanded. Karen, it's October 30th. Halloween is tomorrow. The community guidelines state that seasonal decorations can remain up for 30 days. You put these up on October 1st. Today makes 30 days exactly. I stared at her. You've been counting? I document everything. Tomorrow is day 31, which means you'll be in violation. I'm giving you advance notice out of the goodness of my heart. The decorations come down November 1st, Karen. That's what normal people do. Her eyes narrowed. Normal people follow the rules. Failure to comply will result in escalated enforcement action. That afternoon, Karen hand-delivered a formal letter to my door. She had somehow convinced the HOA management company to send me an official notice threatening legal action if I didn't remove my Halloween decorations by midnight October 30th. The letter cited obscure subsections of the community guidelines and threatened daily fines of $200. I realized then that Karen wasn't going to stop. She had found her target, and she was going to make my life miserable until I either moved away or fought back. Since I had no intention of being driven from my home by a power-hungry HOA president, I decided it was time to fight back. That evening, I made some phone calls. Working in commercial real estate development had given me connections throughout the legal and business community. I called my attorney first, then my friend Marcus, who worked in municipal planning, and finally my contact at the county assessor's office. By Monday morning, I had a plan. The first phase was information gathering. I spent the next week researching everything I could about Karen, the HOA, and our neighborhood's legal structure. What I discovered was fascinating. Karen's house sat on what the original neighborhood plat had designated as Lot 15, but there was an irregularity in the property lines. A small triangular piece of land behind her backyard had never been properly incorporated into any lot. According to the county records, it was still classified as undeveloped common area, even though Karen had been maintaining it as part of her yard for years. She had built a decorative rock garden there and installed what she called her meditation space. More interesting was what I learned about the HOA itself. Maple Ridge Estates had been developed in 3 phases between 1998 and 2004. The original developer had maintained control of the HOA board until 2006, when the last lots were sold and control was supposed to transfer to the homeowners. However, there was a technicality in the transfer documents that had never been properly resolved. According to the legal paperwork, the developer had retained ownership of 3 small parcels of common area land throughout the neighborhood, including 2 tiny strips along the main entrance road and that triangular piece behind Karen's house. These parcels had never been officially transferred to the HOA, which meant they were still owned by the original development company. The development company had been dissolved in 2008, and its assets had been acquired by a larger firm, which had subsequently been bought out by an even larger corporation. Through a series of mergers and acquisitions, those 3 small parcels were now technically owned by a subsidiary of a major national real estate investment trust. It took me 2 more weeks and several phone calls to the right people, but I managed to track down who currently held legal title to those parcels. More importantly, I found out they were for sale. The asking price was surprisingly reasonable, probably because the parcels were so small and oddly shaped that they seemed useless for development. What the current owners didn't realize was that these particular parcels held special significance under the original HOA covenant documents. I made an offer, and it was accepted within 48 hours. While the purchase was being finalized, I implemented Phase 2 of my plan. I began attending HOA board meetings regularly, always sitting in the back and taking careful notes. I volunteered for the Landscape Committee and the Architectural Review Committee. I started participating in neighborhood email discussions, always politely and constructively. Karen seemed pleased by my increased community involvement. She probably thought her harassment campaign had successfully beaten me into submission and turned me into a model citizen. During this time, I also made friends with several of my neighbors, particularly those who had grown tired of Karen's increasingly authoritarian approach to HOA governance. I learned that I wasn't the only one who had been targeted for harassment. Karen had been systematically bullying residents for minor infractions, creating an atmosphere of fear and resentment throughout the neighborhood. Jim Morrison from the board confided in me that Karen had been trying to expand the HOA's authority, proposing new rules about everything from the types of flowers people could plant to the colors they could paint their front doors. She had also been pushing for increased enforcement powers, including the ability to place liens on properties for unpaid fines. 3 months after my Halloween decoration ordeal, I received the deed to those 3 small parcels of land. Officially, I now own 3 pieces of common area that had never actually been common area, scattered throughout the neighborhood. The triangular parcel behind Karen's house was the most interesting. According to the survey, it was approximately 800 square feet of land that Karen had been treating as her private backyard for over a decade. Her rock garden, meditation space, and decorative fence were all technically on my property. But that wasn't the best part. The really interesting discovery was hidden in the original HOA covenant documents, which I had obtained from the county clerk's office. There was a clause stating that the original developer retained certain access and utility rights to those 3 parcels in perpetuity. Those rights had transferred with ownership, which meant I now had legal access to those parcels for maintenance and improvement activities. The access rights were quite broad, including the right to cross other HOA properties as necessary to reach the parcels, the right to install utilities and infrastructure, and the right to make reasonable improvements to the parcels as long as they didn't violate county zoning laws. I spent the next month carefully reviewing county zoning regulations and HOA covenant documents, looking for the perfect opportunity to implement Phase 3 of my plan. The opportunity came in early February when Karen announced that she was running for HOA president again, unopposed as usual. Her campaign platform, distributed via email to all residents, included a promise to strengthen enforcement of community standards and eliminate disruptive elements that threaten our neighborhood character. The email included a not-so-subtle reference to residents who think the rules don't apply to them, and a call for stronger penalties for repeat violators. That weekend, I drove to my attorney's office to review the final details of my plan. Everything was legal, everything was documented, and everything was about to be perfectly, devastatingly effective. On Monday morning, I filed the necessary permits with the county and sent formal notifications to the HOA board, as required by law. I was exercising my property rights to make improvements to my parcels, including the installation of utilities and the construction of appropriate structures. The first sign that something was happening appeared on Tuesday. A surveyor showed up and began marking property lines throughout the neighborhood, paying particular attention to the areas around Karen's house. Karen came out to question him, but he politely explained that he was conducting a survey for a private property owner and couldn't provide details. On Wednesday, a utility crew arrived to install electrical service to my triangular parcel behind Karen's house. They had to run the power line across Karen's backyard to reach the parcel, which was perfectly legal according to my access rights. Karen called the police, but the officers confirmed that all proper permits had been filed and the work was legitimate. Thursday brought a construction crew with building materials. They began constructing a small structure on my triangular parcel, right in the middle of what Karen had considered her private meditation space. The structure was perfectly legal under county zoning laws, classified as an accessory building, for property maintenance purposes. Karen was beside herself. She called emergency HOA board meetings, contacted the county planning office, and even tried to get a restraining order. But everything I was doing was completely legal and properly permitted. The HOA covenant documents clearly stated that individual property owners had the right to improve their lots, and my parcels were legally separate properties, not subject to HOA architectural review. By Friday, the construction was complete. I had built a small storage shed, painted in a cheerful shade of bright pink that was perfectly compliant with county regulations. The shed was positioned so that it was clearly visible from Karen's kitchen window, right in the middle of what used to be her rock garden. But the shed was just the beginning. Over the weekend, I installed motion-activated floodlights around all 3 of my parcels, including 2 along the main entrance road. The lights were connected to timers and sound sensors, so they would turn on whenever a car drove by or when ambient noise levels reached a certain threshold. This was perfectly legal for security purposes. I also installed a small weather monitoring station on my triangular parcel, complete with an anemometer that spun continuously and a rain gauge that made a small clicking sound every time it moved in the wind. Monday morning brought the peace to resistance. A landscaping crew arrived to install my new garden design on all 3 parcels. I had chosen plants that were perfectly legal and environmentally appropriate, but also specifically selected for their unique characteristics. On the triangular parcel behind Karen's house, I planted a small grove of bamboo. Bamboo is technically a grass, not a tree, so it wasn't subject to the HOA's tree planting restrictions. It also grows very quickly and can reach heights of 20 feet or more, effectively blocking Karen's view of the rest of the neighborhood from her backyard. On the 2 parcels along the main entrance road, I installed what I called native prairie restoration areas. These were essentially wildflower meadows that would grow tall and dense, requiring minimal maintenance while providing habitat for local wildlife. They would also block the carefully manicured sight lines that Karen had worked so hard to maintain along the neighborhood's main entrance. But the real masterpiece was what I did with the access rights. According to the covenant documents, I had the right to cross other HOA properties as necessary to maintain my parcels. I decided to exercise this right by establishing a regular maintenance schedule that required me to drive across the neighborhood several times per week. The most efficient route to my triangular parcel happened to run directly past Karen's front window. Every Tuesday and Friday morning at precisely 7 a.m., I would drive my maintenance vehicle, a perfectly legal but notably loud diesel pickup truck, along this route to check on my bamboo grove and weather station. The route to my entrance road parcels required me to drive past Karen's house from the other direction every Monday and Thursday, also at 7 a.m. Within 2 weeks of implementing my new maintenance schedule, I received an angry letter from Karen demanding that I stop harassing her with my unnecessary trips through the neighborhood. I responded with a polite letter explaining that I was simply exercising my legal property rights and maintaining my parcels according to county regulations. I attached copies of all the relevant covenant documents and legal precedents supporting my position. Karen's response was to file a lawsuit against me, claiming that my activities constituted harassment and were damaging her property values. She also filed complaints with the county, the state attorney general's office, and anyone else who would listen. This was exactly what I had been hoping for. My attorney responded to Karen's lawsuit with a countersuit, claiming that Karen had been illegally occupying my property for over a decade and demanding compensation for her unauthorized use of my land. We filed detailed documentation showing that she had built structures on my property, had been maintaining it as if it were her own, and had even claimed it as part of her yard when she refinanced her mortgage. We also filed a complaint with the HOA board pointing out that Karen, as president, should have known about the irregular property lines and should have disclosed them to the community. Her failure to properly research the neighborhood's property boundaries had resulted in multiple residents unknowingly maintaining land that didn't belong to them. The legal discovery process was particularly entertaining. Karen's attorneys had to provide documentation of all her HOA enforcement activities, including her detailed records of measuring my decorations and photographing my property. These records actually helped prove that she had been conducting systematic harassment campaigns against residents she didn't like. Meanwhile, my bamboo grove was growing beautifully. By late spring, it had reached 8 feet tall and was providing excellent privacy screening for my weather monitoring station. The motion-activated lights were working perfectly, turning on whenever Karen walked in her backyard or opened her kitchen window. The prairie restoration areas along the entrance road were also thriving, creating a natural meadow effect that attracted butterflies and songbirds. Some of the neighbors actually complimented me on my environmental stewardship, though Karen had been sending around emails calling it deliberate neglect and a threat to property values. The breaking point came in early June, during the annual HOA meeting. Karen had prepared another PowerPoint presentation, this one titled, "Stopping Property Terrorism in Our Community." She stood at the front of the community center, clicking through photos of my various improvements and explaining how each one was part of a calculated campaign to destroy the neighborhood's character. "This resident has systematically targeted our community with disruptive activities," she declared, gesturing at a photo of my pink storage shed. "He has installed industrial lighting, constructed unauthorized buildings, and allowed weeds to grow unchecked along our main entrance." She clicked to the next slide, which showed my bamboo grove. "This so-called landscaping is actually an aggressive invasive species that will spread throughout the neighborhood if we don't take action." Jim Morrison raised his hand. "Karen, didn't the county approve all of these improvements? And isn't that his property he's improving?" Karen's face reddened. "That's exactly the problem. He's exploiting technicalities in our covenant documents to circumvent HOA authority. We need to take legal action to stop this abuse of our community standards." That's when I stood up. "I'd like to address the board, if I may." Karen's eyes narrowed, but she couldn't refuse me the opportunity to speak at an official HOA meeting. I walked to the front of the room and faced the assembled residents. "I want to thank Karen for bringing this issue to everyone's attention, because it gives me the perfect opportunity to share some important information about our neighborhood's legal structure." I had prepared my own presentation, though I didn't need PowerPoint slides for what I was about to reveal. As some of you may know, I recently purchased 3 small parcels of land within our neighborhood boundaries. These parcels were never properly transferred to the HOA when the developer relinquished control, which means they were available for private purchase. I paused to let this information sink in. Several residents looked confused, but I could see Jim Morrison starting to smile as he realized what I was getting at. "What makes this particularly interesting is that these parcels come with certain rights that were established in the original development covenant. Specifically, the right to access and improve these properties as necessary." Karen interrupted. "That doesn't give you the right to harass the neighbors or violate community standards. Actually, Karen, it does give me quite a few rights that you might not have considered." I turned to address the full room. "You see, when I researched the property records, I discovered something fascinating about our HOA's legal authority. The covenant documents that establish the HOA's power to regulate property improvements specifically exempt the 3 parcels I now own. These parcels are subject to county zoning laws, but not to HOA architectural review or landscaping requirements." Jim Morrison leaned forward. "What exactly does that mean?" "It means I can make any improvements to my properties that comply with county regulations, regardless of HOA rules. But more importantly, it means I have legal standing to challenge certain HOA enforcement actions that interfere with my property rights." Karen's face had gone pale, but she was still fighting. This is ridiculous legal maneuvering that won't hold up in court. Actually, it already is held up in court. Karen, your lawsuit against me was dismissed last week. My countersuit, however, is proceeding to trial. The room erupted in murmurs and whispered conversations. Karen stood frozen at the front of the room, her PowerPoint presentation forgotten. I continued. But here's the really interesting part. In preparing my legal defense, my attorneys discovered that our HOA has been operating without proper authority for several years. The original developer failed to properly transfer certain regulatory powers when the HOA was established, which means many of the enforcement actions taken by the current board may have exceeded the HOA's legal authority. Jim Morrison was grinning now. Are you saying the HOA has been issuing invalid fines? I'm saying that residents who believe they've been unfairly targeted for harassment might have grounds for legal action against both the HOA and individual board members who exceeded their authority. Karen finally found her voice. This is blackmail. You're trying to intimidate the board. Not at all, Karen. I'm simply sharing information that affects the entire community. In fact, I think this information is so important that I've prepared detailed legal summaries for anyone who's interested. I gestured toward the back of the room, where I had stacked copies of a 20-page document outlining the HOA's questionable legal authority and the rights of residents who had been subjected to excessive enforcement actions. The summary includes contact information for attorneys who specialize in HOA disputes, as well as instructions for filing complaints with the State Attorney General's office about HOA board members who abuse their authority. The room was buzzing with conversation now. Several residents were already heading toward the back to pick up copies of my legal summary. Karen stood at the front of the room, watching her authority crumble in real time. But I wasn't finished. There's one more thing I wanted to share with everyone. Karen, you've spent a lot of time and energy documenting what you call violations of community standards. You've taken photos, made measurements, filed complaints, and demanded enforcement action against residents who don't meet your personal preferences. Karen's hands were shaking now, though whether from anger or fear, I couldn't tell. What you apparently didn't realize is that your own property has some interesting compliance issues. I pulled out a folder and opened it to reveal photos of Karen's house and yard, taken from various angles. For example, your decorative rock garden that you've been maintaining behind your house? The one with the meditation space and the privacy fence? That's actually on my property. You've been trespassing and maintaining unauthorized structures on land that doesn't belong to you. Karen's mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. Your fence extends 18 inches beyond your actual property line. Your rock garden covers approximately 300 square feet of my land. And that decorative fountain you installed last summer? Also on my property. I closed the folder and looked directly at Karen. According to your own standards for HOA enforcement, these violations require immediate correction and substantial fines. Since you've been maintaining unauthorized structures on my property for over a decade, I calculate the trespassing fees at approximately $15,000 plus removal costs. The room was completely silent now. Everyone was staring at Karen, waiting for her response. But here's what I find most interesting, Karen. When you filed your lawsuit against me, you claimed that my legal improvements were harassing behavior designed to damage your property values. You argued that property owners shouldn't be allowed to make changes that negatively impact their neighbors. I paused for effect. I've decided to test your theory. Tomorrow morning, I'm implementing a new maintenance schedule for my triangular parcel. Since it's my property, and since you've established the precedent that property owners can make improvements regardless of neighbor complaints, I'll be exercising my full legal rights. Karen finally managed to speak. What are you talking about? I'm installing a compost facility." The words hit the room like a physical blow. Several residents gasped audibly. A compost facility is perfectly legal under county zoning laws for properties over 500 square feet. My parcel qualifies. The facility will process organic waste materials and produce environmentally beneficial soil amendments. Jim Morrison was trying not to laugh. "What kind of organic waste materials?" "Oh, all sorts of things. Food scraps, grass clippings, leaves, manure from local farms. The county actually encourages composting as an environmental benefit. I've already filed all the necessary permits." Karen was shaking her head frantically. "You can't do that. It's going to smell terrible. It'll attract flies and rats. My property values will be destroyed. According to your own arguments in your lawsuit against me, property owners have the right to make legal improvements regardless of neighbor complaints. You specifically stated that my concerns about your harassment were invalid because you were operating within your legal rights." I smiled at her. "I'm just following your example, Karen. If it's acceptable for you to take actions that negatively impact your neighbors, then surely it's acceptable for me to do the same." Karen was stuttering now, trying to form coherent sentences. But this is different. This is deliberate. This is revenge. This is property ownership, Karen. This is exercising legal rights. This is following the precedent that you established when you decided that neighbor complaints don't matter as long as you're technically following the rules." I turned back to address the room. "The compost facility will be operational within 2 weeks. I'll be accepting organic waste donations from any residents who want to participate in our neighborhood's new environmental initiative. Just bring your materials to the collection area behind Karen's house." The room erupted in laughter and applause. Karen stood at the front, her PowerPoint presentation still glowing on the wall behind her, her mouth hanging open as she realized exactly what had just happened. She had spent months harassing me over Halloween decorations. She had filed frivolous lawsuits, issued bogus violation notices, and turned HOA enforcement into a personal vendetta. She had established the precedent that neighbor complaints were irrelevant as long as someone was technically following the rules. Now I was going to follow that exact precedent, using her own logic to justify installing a compost facility that would smell like rotting garbage directly behind her kitchen window, on property that she had been illegally maintaining as her own private backyard for over a decade. Karen's face went through a series of expressions: confusion, realization, horror, as the full scope of what I had accomplished finally hit her. She had been completely, thoroughly, and permanently outmaneuvered using her own tactics against her.